Welcome to Rapid Fire Wednesdays, Q&A for corporate immigration professionals. I'm Kimberley Robidoux, a partner in our San Diego office, and I'm joined as always by Miki Matrician, our co-managing partner of the Boston office. How are you doing, Miki?
Hanging in there, Kim. How are you?
Hanging in there as well. So that leads us into what we're going to talk about this week. So this week, we are discussing the Presidential Proclamation, which restricts entry of certain H-1B workers into the United States. So, Mickey, it has certainly been a whirlwind the last few days, starting around 4 p.m. Pacific time last Friday. Immigration lawyers and HR and mobility teams were working through the weekend to notify foreign nationals and provide guidance on this really unexpected announcement from the White House. Foreign nationals were scrambling to get back into the United States, whether it be continental US or Hawaii, Guam, or Puerto Rico, or even pre flight inspection airports in countries such as Ireland, Canada, and Abu Dhabi. H-1B workers and some of their family members, right, canceled their vacations or bought new airline tickets to push up their travel to the US to try to get back here before 12:01 a.m. Eastern on Sunday, September 21st, which was only a little more than 24 hours after the issuance of the presidential proclamation. So the proclamation was followed by some social media announcements and agency memos late on Saturday. And then there was a White House FAQ issued on Sunday. And as the situation unfolded, we realized that there are still so many unanswered questions. So I'll ask you again, Mickey, how are you holding up after all of this?
It's been such a whirlwind. I was already sitting down for dinner and a glass of wine with my husband at 7 p.m. when I saw the update. So I had to leave my poor husband behind on the patio to finish up dinner and so that I could start tackling the issues and reviewing reports and, getting out alerts and emailing my clients. But I think, the thing that shook everyone up was that initial language of the proclamation. It was very broad, and it basically said that as of Sunday, September 21st, H-1B workers could not enter the US unless a $100,000 fee was paid. The proclamation didn't distinguish between those who already had H-1B visas and those who did not. And it looked like it applied to all H-1B workers, which really was the thing that caused panic on Friday and through the weekend. And the purported reason for this proclamation was to combat fraud in the H-1B system. And it cited to exploitation of the H-1B program and specifically pointing to IT outsourcing companies' alleged overuse of the H-1B program. And ironically, though, this proclamation really does impact all employers in all industries, large and small organizations alike.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So the order is two main things. First, it's an entry restriction for certain H-1B workers unless there's a payment of $100,000. The other is a restriction on H-1B adjudications at USCIS if the petition doesn't have included with it the $100,000 payment. So when the agencies and the White House issued memos and the FAQs eventually on Saturday and Sunday, the scope of the proclamation ended up being a little narrower, right? It seemed to shrink a bit. So the scope as it stands now is that the government says that the $100,000 payment is for any new H-1B petitions submitted after 12:01 Eastern on September 21st. And it says it includes the 2026 lottery and any other H-1B petitions submitted on or after September 21st. So that sounds pretty bad, but they do carve out H-1B renewals as not being impacted. And, when we talk about it, this is confusing, right? Because in our world, when we say H-1B renewals, that usually means renewal applications for H-1B visa stamps. So the visa stamping, those stamps, are typically placed in the passports, and it is not a petition that's filed with the Immigration Service. So what we think the government means is that the H-1B extension petitions are not impacted, and they are not considering an extension to be a quote unquote new petition. USCIS's memo also confirmed that the proclamation does not impact people whose H-1B petitions were filed with USCIS before September 21st. The U.S. State Department does not say that the consulates will process and issue H-1B visa stamps for people whose petitions were approved or filed before September 21st, but that would be our conclusion. So yesterday, we were receiving reports that applicants' H-1B visas were, in fact, being approved and issued at the U.S. consular post abroad.
And there really are still so many unanswered questions. When the White House says that the proclamation applies to new petitions, what do they mean? So, as you mentioned, Kim, I agree that we believe that extension petitions are not considered new, so not subject to the proclamation. And then we hope that H-1B transfers, which are also called change of employer petitions, are also not subject to this fee. We're kind of reading the tea leaves and making an educated guess that, when they say renewals, they mean extensions of stay, which would encompass H-1B transfer or change of employer petitions. So this this educated guess, does require a couple of assumptions. And the issue is that it's not been confirmed by the White House or any of the agencies. And we're also hoping that since the proclamation seems to be targeting new H-1B workers coming from outside the US, that petitions that request a change of status from within the US, from another status to H-1B, would not be impacted. But again, nowhere in the proclamation or the agency guidance does it state that. It's confusing because the White House says that the 2026 cap H-1B petitions are impacted. And it seems that cap cases for consular notification are likely impacted, probably definitely impacted, but it's not clear how they will treat change of status petitions if people are remaining stateside and not leaving the United States. Also, not clear if once they leave the United States, whether they would then become subject to the restrictions and $100,000 fee payment. So the White House seems to be really focused on the H-1 lottery. Does that mean that cap-exempt employer petitions are restricted too, or are they exempt? And we don't have answers to those questions. And these are some really important questions that we are waiting for further guidance on.
Right. And when you're talking about the 2026 cap, that's the one in March. That's coming up March of 2026. Right. So not the one that we just made it through. And some of those petitions are still pending, which fortunately they were filed before September 21st, which is one of the deadlines we're looking at. So, yeah, we really do hope that there's specific and informative guidance that will be forthcoming very soon, hopefully, from the government. So, one thing that was clarified was that the White House confirmed that the fee is a one time fee on submission of a new H-1B petition and not an annual fee, which is what was initially stated by the Commerce Secretary during the press briefing before the proclamation was officially issued. That created a lot of confusion. So the proclamation has a provision that has a carve out for national interest exceptions for hires that are deemed vital to the United States national interest and does not pose a threat to U.S. security or welfare. The proclamation does not automatically provide exceptions or provide parameters for national interest. So, interestingly, it does say that exceptions are possible for individuals, entire companies, or a whole industry sector. So the process has not been confirmed whether we would include a support letter and supporting documentation, or if there would be a form to request this national interest exception. We anticipate that it would be a highly discretionary and subjective process. Once employers have identified who would be subject to the $100,000 fee, they should work with their immigration counsel to strategize on individuals or roles that are most likely to qualify for a national interest exception. During the travel bans under COVID, we relied on the government's documents, grants, and research to support national interest exception filings. So, I guess it would be similar, but what is considered to be in the national interest seems to be in flux at this time. So, if they're strategizing carefully with counsel. So, Mickey, what travel advice are you giving to people at this time?
Yeah. So I would say if you are a foreign national that's currently in the United States, I am urging people to refrain from non essential travel at this time. Why? Because number one, the landscape is so fluid right now. Just because there's no travel ban or restriction today doesn't mean there won't be one tomorrow. Not to scare anybody or to be too alarmist, but I would say take this proclamation, for example. We had no notice, there was no advance warning whatsoever. And then reason number two, the proclamation and the initial guidance are so confusing, especially given the use of terms that are not standard in the legal world for H-1Bs. So if immigration professionals are confused, I would bet that CBP officers are confused as well. We don't want to see people erroneously rejected at ports of entry. And then if somebody has to travel right now, foreign national employees should really connect with Global Mobility or HR and Immigration Council before finalizing any travel plans. And then for sponsor foreign national employees that are currently outside of the United States, even though there is no immediate cutoff, I do think it's a good idea to try to return back to the US soon since the landscape is in flux. If the employee has a visa appointment, by all means, attend the interview, return to the US when you get your visa stamp. And we also recommend carrying the CBP memo and White House FAQ that state that the proclamation does not prevent any holder of a current H-1B visa from traveling in and out of the United States. Kim, let's talk about what employers should do now. One is to continue staying connected with legal counsel and following the latest updates to the legal landscape, like by listening to Rapid Fire Wednesdays with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also recommend, reviewing the foreign national population, assess who may be impacted by this proclamation. And if you aren't already doing this, partner with your council to develop a system for tracking your employees' travel plans. Not because you're being nosy, but because you want to ensure that if they leave, every best attempt can be made to prepare them for a successful reentry to the US. And then identify potential national interest roles for the national interest exception filings if needed. So, given that the proclamation also directed the Department of Labor to increase prevailing wage levels, employers should start thinking about how to handle this. So, hopefully, private wage surveys can still be used if the Department of Labor's OES wage data do not work, but anticipate having to deal with higher prevailing wages, unfortunately. Finally, start thinking about budgeting scenarios for the $100,000 impact if that's going to be the only possible way to sponsor certain individuals for H-1B status. And then we also know that there is litigation that is being prepared and hopefully will be filed soon. So stay tuned as we see what comes of that litigation, if that means a preliminary injunction or some other action that might be taken. So, with that, I guess it wraps up this week's Rapid Fire Wednesday. We will continue monitoring legislative, regulatory, and court developments, as well as agency guidance, and provide updates in future episodes as we hear of them. And then please also check out our webinar that was conducted on September 23rd with our very own Miki and WR partner Carrie Koski on our YouTube channel. So, as always, for the latest updates to the immigration landscape, please follow WR Immigration on LinkedIn, as well as Miki and my personal profiles for breaking updates and insights. We also transcribe each and every Rapid Fire Wednesday episode and share it through our weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to. The link to subscribe can be found in the video description. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Great seeing you, Miki, and hang in there.
You too, Kim.